our new voter ID law. And when I say issues, I mean we're going to spend the next hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes talking about a very small percentage of the voters who came in and gave us problems with this ID law. As you know, many of you who worked here for me for a long time now, you know that when we spend time together like this, we're talking about a few voters, right? We're wasting our time on a Friday afternoon talking about a few voters. But it's those few voters that get on Facebook and Twitter, and before you know it, the news catches it, and then the newspaper makes us out to be like we don't know what we're doing. And we do know what we're doing. We've been doing this for a long time, you and I both, sitting across from each other. So we're going to talk about what went on March 6th and what we have been doing since then to prepare ourselves for June 5th and for November 6th. I am not going to talk about any election that's going to happen in 2019. Okay? We're only going to talk about 2018. So if you're asking me today, if in the back of your mind you're saying, well, what about 2019? I'm not even going to answer that question. So you might as well not even ask it. We're just going to focus on the June primary and the November general and any small election that happens in between. There she is. Hey,
sorry.
You're okay. So, what have we been doing since then? What have we been doing since March 6th to get us ready for June 5th? Well, first of all, we had a small election in Altoona in April. We had a small election in Altoona in April, and we were based off of that, we were able to kind of come up with some new ways of doing things. So some of the forms that you've seen in the past, you won't see anymore. We've thrown them away. They're outdated or they're just not practical. We've also created some new forms. We've created some new forms for the voter, created some new forms for you. So we'll be able to discuss those forms, and some in detail, some I'll go over real quick with you, and then we'll be off and running. So first, I also want to lastly say I'll take a lot of the responsibility for what happened in March. We did have training in March, but maybe there was some communication breakdown with some of my precinct captains and poll workers on what needed to happen, because there are some things that we did that we shouldn't have done that we need to make sure we don't do in June. Our staff out front need to be educated better. I know for a fact our staff out front gives information to the voters and maybe to you that was incorrect. How do I know that? Because I heard them do it. So they need to be educated between now and June on what to properly say to the public and or my poll workers in the field. And last but not least, the voters need a slap on the hand too, because the voters need to be better educated on what's happening here. Some of the voters actually knew more than we did. That can't happen. We need to know more than the voters do about this. And then we need to be able to communicate to the voters when they still don't agree with what's happening. Remember, this is not Steve Morrow's law. This is not Ken Aggie's law. It's not your law. This is the state of Iowa law, and it's here to stay. Many of you in this room, we were here in 2008 when we had same-day registration, right? And we had the training in this room. I did the training in this room with some of you people, and we talked about. We're asking ourselves, how are we going to be able to get the message out to the voters on what they need to bring to the polling place in order to register and vote? We're like, there's no way. There's no way we're going to be able to get that done. And sure enough, on that first election, some voters brought absolutely nothing with them. Some brought half of this and forgot the other half. And some did get the message and brought what they needed to bring with them. My point is, that first election in 08 was bumpy. It was rocky. You know, but then the next election it got better, next election it got better, and so on and so on and so on. To now where I firmly believe when somebody comes into the polling place and they're not registered to vote or they need to change their address, most of them have what they need to show who they are and where they live. Same with voter ID. This law is not, whether you agree with it or not, we're not going to talk about that today, but it's the law, it's not going anywhere, and over time voters, whether they like it or not, if they want to vote, are going to have to show an ID. So that's my housekeeping. That's what we're going to talk about here for the next 45 minutes or so. I do want to talk about a new form that we have. And you have some handouts here. I'll ask that you keep the handouts here for my afternoon class. If you have notes, there should be some scratch paper there for you to write on. I know you're going to have questions. If you have questions, I will stop at certain points in my presentation to ask if you have questions, because I firmly believe that once I get done saying what I need to say, I may have answered your question already. Okay, so I'll give you plenty of time for questions and feedback, but let me get through my spiel and then I'll ask you. So this first form that we have is a green sheet, red sheet. Okay, green sheet, red sheet. This is a new sheet. It's doing away with the green card, red card. All of you who worked in March and last year, we had the green card, red card. It was laminated nice and neat. The green card turned the voting machine on. The red card turned the voting machine off. Throwing it away. We're not using that. We're going to a green sheet, red sheet. We also had a yellow card that was for turning on and operating our ADA or our handicap device. Gone. Threw it away. We've added it to our green sheet. Last but not least, we had our 6 a.m. instructions and our closing of the polls instructions tan sheet. Okay? Gone. We threw it away. We put it onto this green sheet. And the reason why we did this is we had an election on April 3rd in Altoona. We had a special election in Altoona on April 3rd, and Ken and I sat out at the Altoona City Hall all day long. For the entire day, we got a good idea of what it's like to be you on an election day for a small election, and it's a long day. But the point I'm trying to make is this. At 6 a.m., I watched my precinct captain set up her polling place, and she did a fantastic job. Marvelous. There's not one thing I could say that she should have done better. It was fantastic. But what I noticed was, and Ken noticed is that she was bouncing around from card to card to card. She would go to this card, then go to that card, then couldn't figure out what she would do on this card. We're like, that ain't gonna work. Let's take all 3 cards, throw them away, and put it all on one sheet of paper. So this is 6 a.m. We'll talk about it here for a few moments. This is 9 p.m. And we'll talk about that when we meet again here in several days. So this is a new form that you are going to be using going forward. In your handouts, and we'll talk about here in a few moments, we also are going to have what's called a poll worker script. It's going to be a series of questions that every poll worker is going to have in front of them that we're going to ask to the voter in a certain order. Okay, we want to ask each question in the same order, at the same time, at the same place to the voter. And that's called a poll worker script. I'll talk about it in detail in a few moments, but that's also new, and we'll talk about in length. A couple other kind of forms we have is we also have what's called a voter expectation form. That form is not in your handouts. This is a form that we'll put, what will be in your supplies. We'll have you put it on the table on election day, and it'll be listed what the voter can expect from us. Why is the poll worker asking me this question, and why is the poll worker asking me these questions in this order? So it's kind of it's taking away the back and forth, and it's telling the voter why we were doing what we were doing. Okay? Want to get away from some of the combativeness and get into a verbal conversation. If that don't work, we can always point to, this is why we're doing this. So that's another form that we will be talking about in detail. Last but not least, we have a poster here. It's a 2018 Election Day Voter Guideline poster. Okay? Well, this is what we'll spend the most of our morning on. And I'll explain it to you real briefly, and we'll come back to it, but this is a green side, red side. Makes total confusion now to you right now, but when you leave here in a few minutes, it's going to make complete, total sense to you. Down at the bottom are acceptable forms of ID a voter can use to prove who they are. Okay, we'll talk about that. Or right next to that, on the right-hand side is, right-hand side is a provisional ballot envelope example and why we would use those, and we'll talk about that. And then right up top is what got us into some trouble in March. This is a 2018 oath of identification form, and we'll spend a few minutes talking about that today. But this poster is what we'll come back to in a few moments, and this is what you'll use on election day. Every poll worker who is operating a black register book, is going to have one of these in front of them. There will also be a poster, maybe 2, depending on the size of your precinct, on the table facing the voter. So the voter can see exactly what we're doing and why we're doing this. Okay, trying to, once again, if they can't verbally understand it, maybe we can point to the scenario and tell them, and show them this is why we're doing what we need to do. And this will make a lot more sense when I get to it in about 5 minutes, okay?
Our staff will also have that same poster
Yes.
when you would call it.
Our staff I'll be working right off of this poster. If Claudia was to call me, I would get to my back pocket, pull out my poster, and we'll figure out what scenario it is, and we'll work the problem that way. So we'll be working off this poster just like you are on election day. Okay? So, I want to get into 6 a.m. real quick. I want to talk about 6 a.m. This is the only piece of paper you are going to need in your hand at 6 a.m. to get your precinct up and running. So you don't need to go rummaging around your bag looking for anything else. As a matter of fact, This will be laminated, waiting for you on your voting machine in this, on side door A where the old form was. Okay? And I want to talk about this for a few moments. We have 3 tasks on here, 3 things we need to do. It's going to take me about 5-6 minutes to explain it, but on election morning it might take you 3-4 minutes to do the whole thing. We have a voting machine task, we have an ADA, opening the ADA device task, and then we have some administrative tasks, some things we need to do administratively in order to get our polling place open by 7 a.m. So I'll start right with number 1, the voting machine tasks, and it says unlock door A, remove contents, unlock door B, remove extension cord. That should be familiar to all of us, except for maybe Mr. Vanderpoort, but this is the one thing I want to point here and make is this. I get a phone call every election, no matter how big, how small, and the precinct captain can't find their ballot box keys. Where are my ballot box keys? I can't find them, I can't find them. And so, I'm going to show you where they're at. In your brown bag that you'll pick up on June 1st from me out at River Place, we have a new folder, a clear pocket folder like this. Do you remember those brown manila folders we used to have that we scotch taped 35 times to keep them together? We've thrown those away. We now have a clear pocket folder, and right inside down there is your ballot box key. So you'll pull that out. It's on a red keychain. There'll be 2 keys on there. They're universal keys. They open up both doors. And our instructions say to unlock door A. So Ken's going to do that for me. Real quickly, going to go through here and see what you're going to find in here. And you got a bunch of goodies. We have our green supply bag. It has our pens, signs, tape, provisional ballot envelopes, secrecy folders, so on and so forth. All in here ready to go for your polling place. We have your provisional ballot envelope or bag. We'll come back to this. This is going to be an